Hey, this is Joe, and today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. If you remember in class, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now it's important to know what the quadratic formula is used for. One use is for solving quadratic equations where they're equal to 0. We use the quadratic formula when it's too hard to factor the quadratic equation. We also use the quadratic formula when we want to know the x-intercepts of a quadratic function. Each x-intercept of a quadratic function is going to have the quadratic formula value in the x position, and it's going to have 0 in the y position. So let's go over the steps for using the quadratic formula. First, you got to make sure that your quadratic equation or function is in standard form. That is, it is easy to identify the a, b, and c value. Then, you have to insert your a, b, and c values into the quadratic formula. Notice that there's a plus minus sign within the quadratic formula. That means that once you place your a, b, and c values into the quadratic formula, there's going to be two different values we get as an output. We're going to get one value when we let the plus minus sign be plus, and we're going to get another value when we let the plus minus sign be minus. So let's look at an example. Suppose we're told that we have to find all the values of x that satisfy x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0 using the quadratic formula. The first thing we want to do is identify the a, b, and c values within our quadratic equation here. It looks like a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 3, and c is equal to negative 10. Now, remember that the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Our first step is to plug a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. Notice we have two different values here, one where we use the plus sign for the plus minus and one where we use the negative sign for the plus minus. Next, we want to simplify our values. Negative b, which in this case is negative 3, is going to end up being positive 3, and so we're going to put that in the same position when we simplify. Also, b squared is 9, because negative 3 times itself is 9. Minus 4ac is 40, because I have negative 4 times positive 1 times negative 10. And so b squared minus 4ac is just going to be the sum of both of those values, which is 49. And finally, the denominator 2a is just going to be 2 here. Next, we want to simplify the square root, and so the square root of 49 is 7. And after adding 7 to 3 and subtracting 7 from 3, we get our two values. In this case, we get x equals 5 and x equals negative 2 as our two values from the quadratic formula. This means that x equals 5 and x equals negative 2 are solutions to our quadratic equation. So it's important that we check that these solutions are valid. So once again, we got x equals 5 and x equals negative 2 as our solutions. To check that these are in fact solutions to the equation, we just put them in for x. And on each step, we just continue simplifying using the order of operations. As you can see, we eventually get 0 equals 0. And so x equals 5 and x equals negative 2 are solutions to our equation. Before I go, I just want to remind you that we use the quadratic formula to find values of x that make our quadratic equations that are equal to 0 true. Also, we use the quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts of quadratic functions. It's important that you understand the difference between equations and functions for the quadratic formula so that you understand the directions you're given. I'm Joe, and thanks for spending some time with me.